The name of the veteran is Chris Schuering. His date of birth is July 22nd, 1964. War served in is Iraq, and branch of service is Marine Corps. Highest rank achieved is Active Duty Captain, Major Reserves. Date of recording is November 24th, 2014. Place of recording is Davis, California. Interviewer is Asher Allen, and the relationship is student. The interview is being conducted for the Veterans History Project at the Library of Congress. So we're going to start off with a few just biographical details. So you said you were born in Oakland?
Oakland, California, yeah.
Yes. What were your parents' occupations and siblings, if you have them?
What are their occupations now?
Well,
At the time, my parents were students. At the time I was born, my father has been a lifelong farmer. My mother retired from the University of California at Davis, but recently died. I have one brother and I have one sister. Sister's a doctor, and my brother is a screenwriter.
okay. What were you doing before the service?
I was a college student, and I had a few odd jobs, but nothing career-wise.
Okay. Do you have any other family members who served in the military?
No,
Okay.
so it wasn't a family tradition, really.
So you did enlist in the service, right? Yeah, because there wasn't a draft.
Well, basically, yeah, I volunteered. I didn't enlist in the term that, as that's terms used, because I wasn't an enlisted man. I was commissioned as an officer after volunteering for officer candidate school, officer training. But it was voluntary. There was no draft. I wanted it.
Okay. What was like your reason for enlistment, and why did you choose that branch of service?
That's a great question. That could take 5 minutes to tape by itself. It was basically adventure. I wanted to serve my country too, but I wouldn't say that that was the sole motivation. I would say that I wanted, I wasn't ready to go work at a desk. I wanted something exciting when I was 22, 23 years old. So I chose the Marine Corps. I think the Navy would have been my preference, but at the time that I was looking at it, I wanted to fly jets off of aircraft carriers. And at the time I was looking at it, the Top Gun, the movie, had just come out. This is like 87, and so the Navy was flooded with applications. Everybody wanted to be Tom Cruise, right? So they were only accepting engineering majors out of college with like a 3.5 GPA or better, and I was an econ major out of UC Davis, and my grades weren't that great because I spent a little too much time socializing. I went to the Marine Corps as kind of an afterthought because I knew Marine Corps pilots also flew jets off of carriers and were trained by the Navy and did all that stuff. And so that's how I chose the Marine Corps, because too many people wanted to wear the cute white uniform from Top Gun and be Tom Cruise. And the Marine Corps being a little tougher row to hoe wasn't, and having uglier haircuts wasn't quite as popular, and so it was a little bit easier to get in, I think. So.
Awesome. So describe like your departure for training camp and the early days of training. What was that like?
Trying to remember going off to officer candidate school. So that was in Quantico, Virginia, and I guess that was, it was the winter of 1989, and I was older, so it wasn't this terrifying departure. I was very much looking forward to it. I said goodbye to my parents, and I was, of course, nervous and did all that stuff. And I think I climbed on an airplane, flew back to Washington, D.C., took a bus down to Quantico, Virginia, where Marine Corps Officer Candidate School takes place, and that's a very austere environment. Officer Candidate School in the Marine Corps, it's not a knife and fork school. It's a kind of tough little thing. The Marine Corps is a little tougher, and the first few days were humiliating and degrading, and maybe that's not the right way to say it, but they strip you of all your personality. They cut your hair off, they take away your clothes, they make you into a standardized little unit that looks like every other bald-headed little miserable creature going through training, and the first few days are you just concentrating on eating and sleeping and all that sort of stuff, because the drill instructors are pretty hard on you.
Did you have any specialized training?
No, I was just a college student. With respect to flying, I had soloed in a Cessna out here at the University Airport beforehand, so I had about 20 hours of flying, but that wasn't a prerequisite, and maybe even not that helpful to what I ultimately did, which was become a pilot of high-performance aircraft. But I was just basic college grad with the physical and mental qualifications to go to flight school after officer candidate school, but that was it.
Did you enjoy basic training?
Well, enjoy is eating a piece of pie with whipped cream on top of it. So I didn't enjoy it in that sense. No, but there were certain moments that were exhilarating and prideful moments, moments of self-discovery when you feel strong and you feel like you can. You come on the backside of that thing and you think you can. You think you can conquer the world. That's part of the process, is building you up. They break you completely down in the beginning and they build you up. And so is that enjoyment? I don't know. But there's a sense of accomplishment. There's an exhilaration at times.
Did you have any profound experiences with your colleagues during basic training? Like
bonding?
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. That's you're basically with a bunch of. Now, I don't think I had any women in my officer candidate school class. Yeah, maybe we did. Maybe just a few. They were kind of kept off to the Marine Corps. Doesn't have that many women in the officer ranks, but it was mostly guys, and it was male bonding type stuff. You're proud of your unit, and they bring you together as a unit, and that's what the Marine Corps is about. In a larger sense, is esprit de corps and unit pride, and doing anything for the guy next to you, and not letting him down, and knowing that he wouldn't want to let you down either. So. Experience. When you ask about what you asked, if I had experiences with my colleagues, those were my colleagues. I didn't call them colleagues, but call them buddies or fellow Marines or yeah.
All right. Oh yeah. So how was it adapting to the military life with the physical regimen, barracks, food, and social life?
Social life. It's different than college. So, college, you goof around, you try to get through your classes and stuff, but you're doing a whole lot of socializing. The Marine Corps, it was totally different. It was, stripped down, shaved down, issued, garden variety uniforms just like every other guy as you're pushed through the hoops and exhausted all the time. And how was it to adapt? It was, for the first few weeks of officer candidate school, you're just trying to survive, right? You're just trying to find, 30 seconds of peace in the bathroom, if you know what I mean. You're trying to find enough time at the breakfast table or the lunch table to get the calories into your body that you need, because they're yelling at you and telling you to eat fast. And I remember the first couple of weeks, needing to get the thickest, most calorie-dense, rich food into my body to get through the day of training. And so I would grab the peanut butter jar or pats of butter and just, because that's the kind of stuff that sticks to your ribs, you can't pick at a salad during a 2-minute lunch in Marine Corps officer candidate school because it's not enough fuel for your body. So there were lots of little things like that, and sleep was like a vacation on the Riviera. Sleep was the most wonderful hours of the day. Just the great thing about officer candidate school is all your needs and wants are reduced to the most basic sort of monk-like essentials almost, and it's awesome in a way. You're not worried about the bill that's coming in the mail or the email or it's just like, can I get enough to eat? Can I get enough sleep? Those sorts of things. That's totally cool in a way.
All right. So where did you say you served again?
You mean combat service? Iraq. But I was at training bases. Leading up to that, I was in Virginia, and then I went through flight school in Florida and in Texas, and then came out west to join my squadron at Marine Corps Air Station El Toro, which is closed now, but it was in Orange County. So that's where I was based. And but then I served overseas on ships. So I was sent to Iraq and to Somalia aboard an aircraft carrier that departed from the west coast of the United States, the U.S.S. Abraham Lincoln. And then I served in Korea. I was stationed in Okinawa, Japan, as part of a forward deployment, training type environment.
What is flight training school like? What kind of training do they submit you to?
Oh, well, okay. So flight school is about 1.5 years long. It's very rigorous. About a third that get in, even to get in, you have to be mentally and physically qualified. You got to pass tests. You got to have the perfect eyesight and the hearing. You can't be colorblind, all that sort of stuff. But out of that group that makes it through all those qualifications and shows up at flight school, about a third wash out, don't even graduate. Flight school itself is about 1.5 years long. It is, it starts with ground school, but then it proceeds into actual flying, and you have a flight each day, basically, a hop, as we call them. You have a hop each day, and each hop is a training hop, and each hop is intensively graded in about 15 to 20 different categories, like your situational awareness, your head work, your air work, your navigation, there's all these different categories. So each day is a test. Each time you go flying is a test. And you're studying all the time. There's no day that you show up and go, okay, well, I don't really have a test or anything to worry about today. I'm just going to kind of show up. Every day you got to be up for it. Every time you go flying, because you got an instructor that'll ding you. And potentially wash you out if you're not making the grade. So yeah, flight school 1.5 years long through a couple of different stages: ground school, primary flight training, and then everybody goes through primary flight training in a certain kind of airplane, and from there they figure out where you rank. So the bottom third wash out. The top 2/3 they figure out how do you rank, and the highest in the class go on to advanced, intermediate, and advanced training in jets. Typically, the lower in the class in the Marine Corps go to fly helicopters. So
that basically flows into what one of the questions I was about to ask you. What planes did you personally train on?
So for primary flight training, I flew the T-34C Turbo Mentor, which is a little prop job, turboprop, a quick little thing, looks like a little Spitfire. It's pretty cool. You do your first loops and acrobatics and flying upside down and all that stuff in that thing. And then after I got jets, I went on to intermediate flight training, and I flew an aircraft called the North American T2 Buckeye, T2B or T2C Buckeye. It's a T2 trainer aircraft, and it's your first jet, and it's got 2 little jet engines in it, and it's just a pig. We called it the Thunder Guppy. It's just the ugliest airplane you ever saw. But it was a jet, and it had an ejection seat, and it was like cool. So flew that, and then for advanced jet training, I flew the A4 Skyhawk, the TA4 Skyhawk, which is we called the Scooter, which is just a marvelous little airplane. It was like an MG or a little sports car. It spun on a dime. It was beautiful. It was. I flew the training version of it, but it was actually the A4 itself was a combat light attack carrier-based aircraft that famously John McCain was shot down in over North Vietnam. So it wasn't some little trainer. It was a combat aircraft, but it was an awesome jet. So those were the 3 airplanes I flew in flight school.
Okay, and what kind of mental testing do they perform for flight training, and why do they do mental testing for flying?
Well, okay, so flying, particularly high performance aircraft, is about managing a whole bunch of variables at once at a very high rate of speed. None of them particularly complex by themselves, but just the environment moves so quickly, and it's so constantly changing. Flight school is designed to see who's got the mindset to be able to handle that, particularly high-performance jets that are single-seat airplanes, because you don't have a co-pilot to catch your mistake or whatever. The airplane crashes if you make a mistake. So, in a sense, that's what flight school is. It's mental testing to see if you've got the presence of mind to keep going, keep in this complex decision loop. It's like basically juggling 3 or 4 balls at once. You can't fixate on any one ball because you've got 2 other balls or 3 or 4 other balls to worry about, and that's what I'm talking about there is your airspeed, your altitude, your heading, what your engines are doing, navigation, where am I in space and time. And it's a pretty fluid environment. It's not something you have to be a rocket scientist to do. It's not deeply analytical like quantum physics, but it is very fast paced, and you have to have presence of mind, and you have to not have too well developed a panic impulse to be good at it.
So did you have any preconceived notions from basic training about how your service was going to be that changed maybe?
I remember at the time just wanting to get through flight school and get my wings. I didn't necessarily want to fly jets. I thought anything would be cool, if I got my wings, and if I ended up flying helicopters, that'd be cool too. I thought if I could, wear a helmet and talk on the radio and have all those dials in front of me and I thought it would be dramatic, no matter what. As time went on through flight school, it turned out I was actually very good at it, and that's when I started to refine my idea about, okay, maybe I want to fly jets, okay, maybe I want to fly fighters. What was I going to do after flight school? I had no idea. I mean, I did, it's kind of whatever the government tells you to do. I didn't have some master plan, and I didn't think that, I want to go to some war zone. I didn't have that in mind. During flight school, it was when the Persian Gulf War I happened, and I remember watching, just like everybody else, you guys weren't even born yet, but watching like everybody else on TV, the bombing campaign, and just being mesmerized by that, and all of us being in flight school at that time, very close to being there. I mean, in the scheme of things, we were only a year from graduation. If we were born a year earlier, we might have been the guys over there doing that. And I remember that was sort of the first time thinking that, actually I might be in a shooting match after this flight school thing is over. And that was kind of new. But, we're so focused on the task at hand, just getting through flight school, that we didn't really worry too much about what was next.
And did the news, following off that last question, what did the news events happening at the time really change your perspective on what you were doing there, or did it change the morale of your group?
I don't think it did. Maybe it changed our morale for the positive. I mean, among draftees feel differently, I think, about going to a war zone than motivated volunteer pilots. I mean, we embrace that stuff, right? We're like, God, I wish I was there, this is exciting. This is what I'm training for. This is what I was hoping for. Those sort of childhood visions of heroism and all that sort of stuff. So we were motivated volunteers. We weren't, oh my God, what have I got myself into? I might get blown up, Well, no, that's the whole reason I'm here. That's why I volunteered. A draftee thinks about things differently. A draftee wouldn't even want to be there in the first place. And then if you show him, footage of soldiers getting shot in the streets of Fallujah or something, he'll be like, God, I really don't want to be in this line of work. And we, volunteers, especially Marine Corps officers, have a different perspective on combat. Combat is kind of the sine qua non of a Marine Corps officer. That's where your currency, that's where your credibility, that's where your legitimacy is. That's why the nation has you doing what you're doing. So, did it adversely affect our morale to see, bombing and shooting and on TV just before we were about to graduate from flight school and go do those kinds of things ourselves? No, not at all. The contrary. So I hope that's a good answer.
Oh, that's a plenty good answer. When were you sent to Iraq, and what was your mission there?
So let's see. I got through flight school's a long time. You do a year and a half of flight school, and then you get assigned to whatever aircraft you're going to go fly. And for me, it was the F-18 Hornet, which was kind of the hardest thing to get. And then you have to go train for a year in how to fly that airplane after flight school before you can even go to your first operational squadron, what we called a gun squadron. And so I did a year of that and had to go through carrier qualifications and all that stuff. Toward the end of that year of learning to fly the F-18, there was a squadron, a Marine squadron, that was going over to Iraq as part of an air wing aboard the U.S.S. Abraham Lincoln to enforce the no-fly zone. The no-fly zone was what we were doing in the skies of Iraq after the war was over, after we, knocked Saddam back and retook Kuwait and all that stuff. The United Nations had established a no-fly zone over Iraq. Well, this aircraft carrier was going to take this air wing of airplanes, mostly Navy, but a few Marine Corps ones, over to Iraq in the year after the Gulf War to enforce the no-fly zone, to keep Saddam on total defensive, right? And the squadron that I joined lost a pilot at the last minute, and they were like a month away from going to Iraq, and they're like, oh, we got to find a replacement pilot. So they reached down into this training pool of F-18 guys, and I was just finishing up my initial training in the F-18, and they actually took 2 guys to replace the one that they lost, because they figured, well, if we're getting a couple of new guys, one of them might not work out, might kill himself or might freak out and disqualify himself. So they grabbed 2 just to be sure that they were getting, somebody that would be a permanent replacement. And so me and another guy, 2 brand new lieutenants, just fresh out of training in F-18s, joined this squadron that almost immediately went to Iraq and enforced the no-fly zone. So that's what I was doing in Iraq. The aircraft carrier U.S.S. Abraham Lincoln took us about a month to get there, because we had to sail across the Pacific and stopped in Hong Kong, and I don't remember if we stopped anywhere besides Hong Kong, but so down through the South China Sea and through the Straits of Malacca, past Singapore, and up and into the Indian Ocean, and then up into the North Arabian Sea, and then through the Straits of Hormuz into the northern Persian Gulf, where we took up station. We just, the carriers in the northern Persian Gulf just doing circles, launching airplanes day after day after day to enforce the no-fly zone over southern Iraq. So that's what I did.
What was your experience like on the U.S.S. Abraham Lincoln?
Aircraft carriers are a funny thing. It's kind of like the first 2 weeks of being on a ship are kind of fascinating and cool, and after that it's kind of like a jail. Basically it's 100 tiny little gray steel rooms lined up next to each other in a ship. That's just like a prison, right? So yeah, a ship is an interesting thing. Being at sea is very cool, at least initially. And shipboard life is interesting. Like I described for boot camp for you, or officer candidate school, it's one of those things where your whole life is compressed down to a tiny little unit and everything's there. Nothing is more than 500 feet away from you on an aircraft carrier. The post office, where you eat, where you sleep, where you go to the bathroom, where you work, where everything's within 500 feet of you. So in a sense, it's marvelous not to have to commute or to, everything's right there. So it's kind of a cocoon in a way.
Did anyone violate the no-fly zone while you were in service?
Yeah. We had, there's a little bit of cat and mouse going on. So the no-fly zone only went up to the 32nd parallel. And then north of there was sort of the middle 1/3 of Iraq. And then above that, north of the 34th parallel was the northern no-fly zone. So basically, no-fly zones divided the country of Iraq into 3. The bottom 1/3, below the 32nd parallel, was what we enforced, no-fly zone. The top 1/3 of the north of the 34th parallel was the northern no-fly zone, kind of where the Kurds are, which the Air Force was enforcing. And then the middle 1/3 of the country was not a no-fly zone. That was Saddam's airspace. And so Baghdad was there, and he had a few airfields there. that he had about a third of his Air Force left intact after the war was over, the first Gulf War. And he would launch airplanes every now and then to kind of test us. And what they would do is launch a couple airplanes and head south, straight south towards the southern no-fly zone, 32nd parallels here. You're going to have to film this because fighter pilots talk with their hands. Knowing that we would react, we got AWACS in the sky and we got fighters and we get vectored onto them and we'd be running towards them to engage them. And then just before they got to the 32nd parallel, they'd do an U-turn and try to drag us across the 32nd parallel in hot pursuit. The idea being, if we get dragged across the 32nd parallel in hot pursuit and then we get shot down, we're not covered by the United Nations resolution that authorized the no-fly zone. We're out of our airspace. We're war criminals or whatever Saddam would make out of it. So there's a little bit of that going on, but we were onto that and we wouldn't get dragged across the 32nd parallel. So there was some of that cat and mouse gamesmanship. There were other aircraft that popped up within the no-fly zone that we thought were possibly bandits. Bandits are bad guy airplanes, but turned out to be, in one case there were a couple of Saudi F-15s that hadn't filed a flight plan or something. They were just goofing around, and we made a run on them. Had to ID them, but there were a few during that intercept. There were a few hot seconds where I thought I was going to have to let loose a missile. I think a couple of Kuwaiti F-18s one time popped up, and we didn't know what they were, and AWACS targeted us, vectored us onto them, and we identified them pretty quickly. But there's a few minutes there where you're not sure what you got on your radar scope, and you're like, holy smokes.
What is that you keep mentioning, AWACS?
Oh, AWACS, that's the airborne, it's the big Air Force, it's like a Boeing 737 or 7, I think it's Boeing 747 with a giant radar dish on top, and they're kind of the quarterback of the air battle. So they're flying, south of Iraq, inside of Saudi Arabia, but close enough that they've got this giant radar dish, and they've got all these controllers inside the airplane with all these radar screens, and they're identifying targets as they pop up, and this airplane's that, and that airplane's that, and they basically control you. And so when an enemy aircraft pops up and starts heading your direction, the AWACS says, hey, Cowboy 55, I got, 2 unknown riders at whatever, 240 at Angels Medium, and, you're turn right, heading 240 and intercept them, that kind of thing. They give you your vector. They order you onto the target. They give you your vector to intercept. They tell you where to go. They say, turn right 240, descend, blah, 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 your bogey's out there. And then they'll either tell you, if they know what it is, they'll tell you what it is. If they don't know what it is, they'll just call it a bogey, and you got to go identify it. Possibly even, the worst case scenario is you don't identify it until you fly by it and you see what's on its tail. A big red star or an American flag or a whatever national markings are on the tail. So that's what an AWACS is. It's the quarterback of the air battle. Am I explaining this coherently?
Yes, you are.
Yeah, it's a complicated subject.
Yeah. You're doing a fine job of explaining everything. Thank you. Was there constantly a plane flying to identify? Like, was it always back and forth trying to identify planes?
Yeah, we had 24-hour coverage. So I think there was always some sort of a radar plane airborne, whether it was Air Force AWACS or we had E-2C Hawkeyes from the carrier itself, which were our version of a. So there's always a radar command and control airplane airborne, eye in the sky. There's always fighters, because the fighters are the guys out front in the no-fly zone that have got the missiles to shoot down a bad guy. There's electronic warfare aircraft that are airborne, and they're monitoring the radars, the ground installations, the surface-to-air missile sites, and stuff like that. And they can jam enemy radars and stuff like that, so the enemy can't target you or can't even see you. So it's very complex. There's all kinds of different aircraft airborne, and we maintain 24-hour coverage. That's what a no-fly zone is. I think the carrier was assigned. We had it from noon to midnight, and then the Air Force had it from midnight to noon. And the Air Force launched their airplanes out of various air bases in Saudi Arabia and I think mainly Saudi Arabia and Kuwait. So American airplanes were airborne constantly and enforcing the no-fly zone 24 hours a day.
And when was the first time, if any, that you had to engage the enemy?
Oh, I never had to fire on the enemy. Never did.
Right.
Never had to take a shot at a bad guy. Saddam at that time he had lost 2/3 of his Air Force during the Gulf War, right? You remember the Gulf War happened, and they lost about Saddam lost about a third of his airplanes in like the first few days of the conflict to being either destroyed on the ground, or those few that came up to fight were just shot down by American or British airplanes. So Saddam had lost a third of his airplanes in like 3 days, in the first 3 days of the Gulf War. And then another third of Saddam's airplanes boogied. They flew over to Iran just to escape destruction. So a whole bunch of Saddam's airplanes went to Iran and were impounded in Iran because Iran wasn't going to give the airplanes back to Iraq. So Saddam was really only left with about a third of his airplanes, a third of his Air Force, and that was all he had. And he knew that we had overwhelming air superiority, so he was not launching airplanes to do too much fighting with us, because fighting just resulted in Iraqi airplanes getting shot down, not American airplanes getting shot down. So really the only thing he was doing was a little bit of cat and mouse stuff to try to get us to make a big mistake, but mostly not challenging the no-fly zone too much at that time. Now, over the next 10 years, of course, there were various periods of, things got hotter, then things got quieter. But when I was there, I would have to say it was relatively quiet.
Did you have any nose art on the plane? If so, what?
Oh, that's a great question. Like Memphis Belle or something? No, we did not. My name was painted on the cockpit, of course. First Lieutenant C.C. Flounder Schuering. Flounder was my call sign. Each pilot would get his name painted, right under the thing with your nickname or your call sign. But no nose art. There was, my squadron markings were on the airplane. I guess you could call that, it's not nose art, but it was on the side of the airplane. It was a black knight's head with a lance, and the black knight's head had I think a red plume of feathers coming off the back. That was our squadron, logo. And then on there would be tail markings that said U.S.S. Abraham Lincoln, which was the aircraft carrier we belonged to, and then a couple of markings like that, but no like gaudy nose art like Memphis Belle. Airplane's mostly gray, for camouflage reasons. So.
Did you get to pick your call sign, or was that assigned?
No. Guys that try to pick their own call signs almost immediately get assigned the exact opposite of what you asked for. So that's the rule. It's like a team. It's like, people make fun. We make fun of each other. You make fun of each other by giving the other guy a nickname that's a burn, right?
How did the second Iraq conflict differ from the first one, and what was your mission during that war?
The second one?
Yes.
My mission during the second Iraq War, where we went all the way to Baghdad, my mission was to be here in Davis with my children and avoid going back, and I succeeded. So I wasn't here. I was 40 years old or 39 or 38 years old in 2003 or whenever the second war happened. And I had been away from flying long enough that I wasn't going to be called back into the cockpit. They did want me to come back in the reserves, as I was a major by that time or something, but it would have been in the green zone, probably shuffling paperwork in some fluorescent lit bunker for a year away from my kids, and I just didn't want to go back. So I said no. So I didn't go second time around. It wasn't mandatory. It was I had previous Persian Gulf combat experience, and they were like trying to get guys to come back. It's different for younger enlisted troops. For a guy that's a major and is like 4 years old and has got a family and has a new career and stuff, they weren't mobilizing too many of us against our will. And my wife was pregnant with our third kid, and I was like, no thanks. I've been there, done that. I don't want to go back. So I didn't go back. What was my mission in the first go round in the early 90s was precisely what I described to you, was establishing and maintaining air superiority over Iraq, to keep Saddam on the defensive or at bay or whatever the powers that be. And I mean, I can't remember why the United Nations resolutions were adopted. We had just defeated Saddam Hussein, and I think the idea was to protect the Kurds in the north because he had already shown a propensity to gas them, and to keep him, and then the Shiites in the south. I think Saddam had done a lot of persecution to Shiites in the south. Especially the marsh Arabs that lived down in the marshes of the Tigris and Euphrates River Valley, and he engaged in some near genocide type acts against some of those minorities. And so I think we were protecting them. I think that's the reason the United Nations resolution was adopted, was to keep him from doing bad stuff to his own people.
And what was your next mission after the first Iraq War?
Well, we got pulled out of enforcing the no-fly zone after about 3 months or something, because Black Hawk Down happened. Remember in Somalia in early October '93, again, before you guys were born, but it doesn't seem like that long ago to me. A bunch of Rangers got shot up one night in Mogadishu, the capital of Somalia. And I can't remember. Why were we in Mogadishu? Somalia had become a failed state, a collapsed state, and there was famine, and there were warlords, and there was all kinds of humanitarian catastrophe type reasons to be there. And so we had a military presence there, and a bunch of American Rangers, Army Rangers, got in a bad firefight on a mission one night and got pinned down, and like 18 guys got killed and 50 guys got wounded, and they were surrounded by thousands of Somalis with AK-47s running around taking pot shots at them. It was kind of like the Alamo or something for all night long while these Rangers were all pinned down. Anyway, it was a big deal at the time, and a movie was famously made about it, Black Hawk Down. Well, that was President Clinton at the time wanted to react right away, and he said, "What do we got?" And whoever his defense secretary or national security advisor said, "Well, sir, we got the Guadalcanal battle, amphibious task force. Where are they?" "Well, they're in Singapore." "How long will it take them to get there?" "Well, it'll take about a month, sir." "What else we got?" "Oh, we got the New Orleans." "Where's the New Orleans task force?" "It's in the Eastern Mediterranean." "How long will it take them to get there?" "Well, it'll take them about a month." "What else we got? I need something there faster." "Well, sir, we do have the U.S.S. Abraham Lincoln nuclear, carrier task force enforcing the no-fly zone in the Persian Gulf, but they're not really, equipped to do much on the ground. They're just jets that can, pulverize something from above." "Well, how soon can they be there?" "Well, they could be there in 3 days because a carrier can move fast." "Well, send them." So we were the guys. So we got sent to. So we pulled out of the Persian Gulf in 3 days of steaming like you wouldn't believe, because an aircraft carrier is nuclear powered and it can smoke through the water. Yeah, we're making like 40 knots, and we were down there within 3 days. And so we were the first guys to Mogadishu in support of the Rangers after that terrible firefight. And so we spent about a month. There wasn't much we could do. We were making jet noise and sonic booms and waving the flag and letting the Somali warlords know that the cavalry was there. But functionally, an F-18 with bombs on its wings can't do much above a city like Mogadishu, because you drop a bomb on a street corner to kill a little warlord guy on a corner with an AK-47, and you blow up 2 square blocks and all kinds of civilian casualties. So functionally, we weren't doing much there except a show of American force and waiting for the slower moving assets with the grunts on it to arrive. So that's what we did.
All right.
Are my answers too long for you?
Oh no, they're perfect.
Okay.
As long or as short as you'd like them to be.
So yeah, I got sent to Somalia, and then after that I got eventually we got to go home because we'd been at sea for 6 months, and it was our time to return to the United States, and another aircraft carrier would take over for us. And so return to the United States, and then you spend a year or two reconstituting, and people change units and move on, and new guys join the units, and you retool and retrain, and then, in another couple of years, you're going to go overseas again. And I did. I went overseas again a couple of years later, except I went overseas as a grunt, as a pilot that was assigned to an infantry battalion as a forward air controller. And so I went over to before we're deployed in Okinawa, Japan, as part of a Marine Corps infantry battalion that was tasked with being sort of a special operations unit that could cruise around on in an amphibious task force and respond to emerging missions in that part of the world. So,
what was it like flying over Somalia?
Somalia was cool. We were kind of relieved to be flying over Somalia. We were all pumped up the first 2 or 3 days because we were like the cavalry arriving on the scene to rescue the poor pinned down American Rangers, and that was great for about 2 or 3 days. But it quickly became apparent to us that we weren't going to do anything but make jet noise in the sky overhead Mogadishu to freak out the bad guys, so to speak. So we started stretching our legs a little bit on some of our missions after a while, and got to see a little bit of Somalia. And Somalia is an interesting country because the southern half of it is close to Kenya, and it's semi. I don't know, you wouldn't call it semi. It's semi-arid. It's got some green to it. It's these plains and savannas and kind of more like Kenya. And then the northern part of Somalia is the opposite. It's sandy and very desert-like. So there's a transition from south to north in Somalia, the sort of landscape you're seeing. Wide open country, not very well populated. If you want some beachfront property that's pristine and not developed, you can probably find it in Somalia, particularly north of Mogadishu, if you're inclined.
Was your tactics of flying over Somalia effective in keeping things in check in Somalia?
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, it probably had some effect on. So the guy's name was Mohammed Farah Aidid, General Aidid. I don't know if he's really a general. He called himself a general. He was the warlord there, the bad guy that we were after. And I think he probably was a little bit careful while there were American combat jets overhead, knowing that he could get blown, his headquarters could be blown sky high. I mean, we knew where all the stuff was down there. We had detailed intelligence. There was the Olympic Hotel, which was supposedly a headquarters for him. There was, the Bakara Market, which was the famous arms bazaar there, where you could buy whatever weapons you want, and where all the militia guys hung out and bought their weapons and belts of ammunition and stuff. So we knew where all that stuff was, and I think he probably kept a little lower profile with an American aircraft carrier 12 miles offshore and airplanes overhead constantly. But really, I think that the real deterrent was when Marines arrived a month later to relieve us. It was the Guadalcanal or the New Orleans or both. Battle groups showed up, and each of them had a couple thousand Marines aboard, and that became a deterrent because in an urban environment like that, it's really the Marines that go house to house, street to street. They're going to suppress the bad guys.
And why would we need mission task forces in Japan? What was your task there?
Well, so I was part of what's called a MEU, MEU, which stands for Marine Expeditionary Unit. In fact, we were MEU SOC, S-O-C. The military is full of acronyms. So we were a Marine Expeditionary Unit, SOC, SOC, which stands for Special Operations Capable, which means we were trained in all these 22 different kind of high-speed missions, from amphibious raids to hostage rescue, to all kinds of close quarters combat, to humanitarian relief and stuff like that. And what that is it's a task force that's made up of 2 or 3 ships, bunch of helicopters, a bunch of amphibious landing things, different things that can move Marines around, and a couple thousand Marines. And we're able to, on a moment's notice, if something happens, like the volcano blows up, or Mount Pinatubo or whatever blows up, and there's a humanitarian catastrophe, the president can say, well, while the Red Cross is getting its act together, the American Marines can be there passing out food within 2 days. That was one of our missions to be ready for. It's a contingency force. Another example would be, well, what happens if there's suddenly this hostage crisis with some terrorists in the Philippines, and 40 Marines are held, 40 Americans are held hostage. A tour bus is taken hostage by some extremist, Filipino guerrillas. Well, Mr. President, we have, this battle group that I'm on with all these other guys, and we can be there within a week and launch helicopters and rescue the hostages. I mean, it's basically a forward position force with a bunch of toys like helicopters and boats and stuff like that can get somewhere and put Marines on the ground and execute a mission very quickly without much notice to take care of an emerging threat or an emerging situation in the third world. So that's what a Marine Expeditionary Unit is. If there are guys that are up front that are like, oh, hey, well, we just happen to be in the neighborhood and we know how to do these things and we can take care of this within 3 days. I mean, that's what the whole idea is, right? Instead of like, oh, we got 40 school bus with 40 hostages, which is American hostages, was just taken in the Philippines, and well, I guess we're gonna have to get some guys together in Los Angeles and San Diego, and what kind of a ship should we get? I don't know. Let's see if there's a ship in Long Beach Harbor. How long will it take us to get that together? Well, in 6 weeks of planning, we got to get some supplies, and we got to do some planning, and then we got to get there. The MEU is out front. It's already prepackaged. It's already got guys trained in those sort of missions, and they're ready to go. And that's what that whole idea is. And it's not just about war. It's like I said, what was the most recent humanitarian thing? There was that big typhoon that hit the Philippines, and a Marine task force got there real fast and started passing out food. There was the tsunami whenever that happened. I mean, a Marine task force is one of the things they're trained in is humanitarian rescue operations, and they can get helicopters flying pallets of food in pretty quickly, which is awesome when people are starving.
All right. This says action witnessed or duties away from the front line. So not when you're actually fighting or something like that, but what were your duties around, say, your headquarters?
Yeah.
And your squad and things like that.
In addition to being a pilot, you're an officer and you have a number of administrative responsibilities. So I was in charge of a maintenance division of Marines, so I had 30 Marines or 35 Marines and a couple of sergeants, a gunnery sergeant and younger Marines that I was in charge of, and I'd have to do all the things like supervise them, manage them, make sure that they're doing okay. When they had problems, I had to discipline them or get assistance for them, things like that. So you're leading Marines as well as just, not just being a pilot by yourself in an airplane, you're also leading Marines on the ground, and you're their boss, their supervisor, their caretaker in a lot of ways that a civilian boss is not, because it's a family. And then you're also assigned collateral duties, like I was a logistics officer for a while, which was about making sure the supplies were coming into the squadron that we needed. Logistics. What else did I do? You've always got a few collateral responsibilities regarding the administration of the because a squadron's a complicated thing, right? You've got a couple hundred Marines, 200 something Marines, and 18 pilots, and 15 airplanes, and so there's a lot of paperwork and a lot of supply type stuff, and just the basics. Marines show up out of basic training, and they got to integrate themselves into the squadron, and you got to make sure they got a place in the barracks, and you got to make sure you got to sort out their financial difficulties if they have them. Maybe they've got a wife or a girlfriend. You got to make sure that the wife or the girlfriend's doing okay, that kind of stuff.
Do you think that more could have been done in the first Iraq War to prevent the second?
That's so complicated, I can't even touch that. I mean, Iraq has been a 20-year problem, and there are many that would say that Saddam was a despot or an autocrat or a dictator, but he's better than the vacuum we created afterwards, which was filled by terrorists and sectarian violence. There is that theory. There is that theory that it takes a strongman in certain countries to keep it from sort of devolving into sectarian violence, and I think that Iraq has certainly done that. What should we have done? I don't know. Clearly, it was across the line when Saddam just rolled into Kuwait. He just rolled into Kuwait, and that was a total violation of international law, and given our oil interests in the region, which let's not underestimate, George Bush Sr. Said, I think he gave him, said, you better be out of there within 6 months or we're coming in to pound you. And Saddam didn't, and we went in and pounded him. And I think wisely, some people faulted President Bush 1 for not going all the way to Baghdad in the first Persian Gulf War. He said, he stopped at a certain point and said, nope, all our mission was, all I said we were going to do was kick him out of Kuwait, and we've done that. And we've recaptured or liberated Kuwait. Kuwait can be itself again, and we're stopping there. And President Bush felt like that was all his mandate was, that if he went any farther and tried to take down Iraq as a whole and conquer Baghdad and all that sort of stuff, that the coalition of international support would fall apart. He's probably right. Unfortunately, we had to go back all the way to Baghdad 20 years later, or whatever it was, or not 20, 13, 14 years later. Was that itself wise? I don't know. I mean, that's too hard to say. I mean, so Bush Jr. goes into Iraq in 2003, goes all the way to the gates of Baghdad, changes the regime, decapitates the regime, gets rid of Saddam, and then, we have what we have now, which is kind of this mess. So, I mean, just way above my pay grade. I don't know if there's any easy answers across the Middle East because of the ethnicities and because of the different religious groups and sects and all that sort of stuff, and the fact that international boundaries in the Middle East have been drawn somewhat artificially by the European nations in a way that doesn't correspond to the way the different ethnic groups shake out, the Kurds and the Shiites and the Shia, none of whom really like each other and often are not capable of coexisting in a single government together. So it's a complicated thing, and you should go back and read the history of the Sykes-Picot Agreement in 1914, which was essentially France and the English dividing up the Middle East after World War I and assigning arbitrary boundaries and arbitrary countries in different places. And that Sykes-Picot Agreement was always a European artificiality, and it largely drew the modern Middle East, and it happens that most of those boundaries don't necessarily coincide that well with the way people really identify with each other tribally and religiously, and so modern Iraq, for example, you got the Kurds in the north, and they're totally different from the Shiites in the south, and the Shiites in the south hate the Sunnis, and the Sunnis hate the Shiites, and you've all got them all thrown together in this one country because that's the way the lines were drawn, and there's an argument that only a strong man could ever have held that together in the first place, but I don't know. Anyway.
If applicable, if you feel like sharing, what were your emotions relating to your combat, witnessing the casualties and destruction that happened in those wars?
Well, so what I saw was the aftermath, and I was always up at 30,000 feet or 20,000 feet or 25,000 feet, so it wasn't like I saw charred corpses. There were a few remains, I remember. I think that some of the wreckage on the Highway of Death was still down there. I remember looking down into the desert at a certain point, and I could see where the massive tank divisions had deployed for battle, because you could see, there would be a couple of single tracks where they were going forward in column, and then when they deployed for battle, you could tell, because the tank tracks in the desert were all of a sudden from a single track branch out into dozens of tracks, which was when they deployed for battle, they go from being in a column to branching out and all like that. And that was awesome looking at that from, and just imagining what that must have been like to see those massive tank formations deploying for battle. So there's a little bit of that stuff you could see. I think that you could see some soot stains from the oil well fires, because one of the last things that happened in the Gulf War, I think, as Saddam was retreating, was they lit all the oil wells on fire, and so there's these massive oil well fires all across the desert, and those were snuffed out over time by Halliburton and some of the Texas boys that made a lot of money to fly over there and do that. But they left a legacy of, you could see soot marks in the desert. But basically you got this big black smoke billowing up into the sky, and if there's a wind, it pushes the smoke that way, and there's like a a V-shaped soot-stained downwind of where the smoke was blowing in the desert. So you could see a few things like that, but I didn't see, I didn't see corpses and stuff like that.
Did you form any really strong friendships with your fellow Marines and the camaraderie of
Oh,
the
of course.
service?
Yeah, that's the primary relationship in combat. I mean, you talk to Marines in combat, and they don't say that I'm fighting for my country. Your country, a lot of people in your country don't really care that much. What you're over there fighting for is each other, not to let each other down, to protect each other, and so the bonds of combat are strong. And flying daily off an aircraft carrier and the danger that involved. I mean, we lost a couple airplanes over there. If you look at my Marine Corps career, 4 of the guys that I flew with are dead now. So that's a different intensity of experience than most civilians have, I think. And so you form intense bonds, and these are guys that I don't see every. We live all across the country now, and I don't see them every day or every month or every year even, but it's instantaneous when I see them again. It's like we were 20, 25 again. I mean, that bond is be there for your lifetime. I mean, you feel when you're over there, you feel like the reasons you're over there are not yours. They're somebody else's reasons, some complex calculus of foreign policy that may or may not be motivated by oil companies and, or whatever it was, or democracy or whatever grand notions there are. But you're the guy stuck holding the bag doing that, maybe getting killed. The camaraderie there is you have each other, And, not too many guys, it's not a very fulfilling reason to die for some sort of vague notion of, at least the flag will wave for another 150 years. I mean, that's too remote, A reason for dying is to protect your buddy who just got shot down, and he's down on the ground, and the Iraqis are closing in on him, and you say you'll stay airborne for another 15 minutes, even though you're low on gas, to protect him. That's why you're there.
So you do still speak to some of these guys
all the time. Yeah. Not all the time. I text them, and we talk. We get together every once in a while.
How do you stay in contact with them? More than just texting and calling, do you visit them, or do you go on vacation there?
Yeah, sometimes a friend will be in town. Some of my buddies are airline pilots, and so they'll come in and out of town for a 2-day layover, and I'll show up at their hotel, and we'll hang out for a couple hours. Or every once in a while there's a reunion, a squadron reunion, or retirement. One of my buddies retired as a colonel after 30 years of service last year, and we all met at his retirement ceremony down in San Diego and had a nice afternoon together. Just stuff like that. One of my buddies I still do a lot of stuff with. We go hiking and climbing. He's got a son my son's age, and we actually so some of them, just different reasons.
Cool. Do you still fly privately?
Yeah, just a little airplane here in Yolo County. No big deal. 6-seater, can take my family places. It's expensive. I mean, $100 an hour in fuel burn, because aviation fuel is $6 a gallon. But when I can, I'd like to do more of it. But I never wanted to fly for the airlines, not in any real way.
All right. And so now we're going to move into more like the home aspect. What are your recreation or off-duty pursuits?
Oh, I don't know. Swimming. I'm hoping to go swimming at noon. I swim in town here at the Masters. I work out a lot. I exercise and, outdoor stuff.
So describe the war's end and coming home.
Well, it wasn't really a war for me. It was no-fly zone, and we were replaced by another aircraft carrier that picked up the duties from us. So it was just, our turn to get home. And, we came back, it took a month to get back to the United States. So there was some time to decompress on the way back. We stopped in Australia for a port call that was pretty nice and spent 5 days in Perth, Australia, unwinding. And then we stopped in Pearl Harbor. It's got a couple of days in Hawaii on the way back. So there was some decompression time, and the flying wasn't as intense on the way back. And then got back to the States, and I remember, that being, it's a little hard to re-engage for anybody because you come back from an experience like that, and now you're standing in line at the mini mart and somebody says something nasty to you about some stupid thing, and it's a little hard to, be. I mean, after being through a really dramatic experience, there is definitely a sense of, I don't know what you'd call it. I don't want to say post-traumatic stress disorder or anything like that because it, wasn't like that. But there's, you find yourself scratching your head and wondering what the meaning is sometimes.
Where were you when the war ended? You were still in the no-fly zone when you were called back, right?
When I was called back to go home?
Yeah.
Yeah. We finished our rotation there, and we were replaced by another aircraft carrier. So, and we were like, thank God, because I'm been away from home for a long time. I want to go home. I mean, living on a ship is great for a little while, but after a while, it's, like I told you, it's a prison. It's a you want to get back to the land of freeways and McDonald's and all that kind of junk that we like, right?
How are you? What was the reception from your family and the community when you first came back?
People were pretty impressed. It's Davis, so it's not like people are telling you what a hero you are. I mean, it's a liberal town, but my parents were very proud of me, and people welcome you home, and they know you've been through something hard, living on the edge like that, and being worried about dying every day and all that stuff. And so people were nice and welcoming. Did people throw a ticker tape parade? Well, it wasn't really like that. I mean, I came home from the no-fly zone. They don't really throw ticker tape parades for the no-fly zone, especially when it's still going on, right? I think that people are very thankful to veterans nowadays in a way that they weren't before, particularly since 911. People tell me thank you for your service all the time, and I go, really? Oh, wow. I mean, you don't need to thank me. I was kind of doing it for my own reasons. I wasn't. A little bit of it was selfless, but a lot of it was selfish. I mean, I wasn't, trying to necessarily save the world. I was trying to do something cool and challenging and something to prove something to myself. So when people thank me for my service, I'm grateful for it, but I don't know if it's totally appropriate. But it's nice that people are that way now. They weren't like that before 911 in quite the same way. In Vietnam, it was a totally different deal. People were like, just all kinds of misplaced anger, spitting on vets and baby killers and that kind of stuff. I don't know. A lot of that stuff is probably exaggerated at the time. I think even in Vietnam, people knew that the vets were over there, not because they chose to be over there. It wasn't their fault. But I think it's different since 911. People are very grateful.
Yeah. Describe your readjustment to your civilian life when you first came back. Was it a lot different? Because like you said before, it was like you're 500 feet from everything, and now you have to readjust to commuting everywhere and doing stuff like that, right?
Yeah, it's pretty. It's. I mean, I don't know what you do to readjust except for just cope and start living your life again like you did before you went over. But yeah, you find yourself frustrated. And I remember sitting in a traffic jam in my flight suit, with my little fighter patches all over, and just looking at the people next to me and going, I'm in a traffic jam. Oh my God, what a waste, just wondering at the meaninglessness of stuff sometimes. But maybe that's just me. Maybe that's nothing to do with war or flying jets.
Yeah, we already pretty much went over that one. How's the wartime experiences affected your life, do you think?
Well, when you do something like that, young in life, yeah, I mean, I think that later in life you're finding yourself, like I was talking about, wondering at the meaning of it all, and it leaves you a little bit. I mean, if you have an intense experience like that, and how do you follow that? What's the follow-on act? Everything, and it's like sometimes it's like going through the motions, right? It's like, God, I used to fly jets off of carriers, and the immediacy and the danger of that, and I mean, you live so vitally, it's scary, but you're also very intensely alive. And then you go do something like sit at a desk for years and years and years, and you don't have that imminency of anything. Yeah, so it can be that can be a challenge, I think, just existentially, right?
Yeah.
But I talk to any high school quarterback, and he'll be like that too. He'll be like, God, I was that back in the day when I was the high school quarterback, and now I'm selling insurance or whatever. I mean, that's common to men and women as they age. You aren't, as you get older, you miss some of the things about being young. That's just normal. So,
did you take any really profound life lessons from your military service? From basic all the way through your wartime, did you pick up any kind of big life lesson from that?
Oh, don't fight unless you have to, and then if you do have to fight, don't fight fair. No, that's just fighter pilot rules right there. It's not. Survival's a good idea. I think that's learning how to survive and to take care of yourself and to be watching out for yourself is absolutely essential to surviving in that sort of an experience. I don't know. Integrity, there was a lot of things that I really prided about my fellow Marine Corps officers. I didn't agree with them politically necessarily. We didn't even talk about politics that much because actually we didn't have any influence over our politics anyway. We were just sent wherever somebody else told us to go. But what I liked about them was their integrity, their honesty, the fact that they would watch your back in a way that you couldn't necessarily trust people back home. And that's that intensity, the camaraderie, and that sort of stuff.
All right.
Keeping trying, always keep trying. And that sounds stupid, but in the face of adversity, never giving up. I mean, that's a large part of what it's all about. It's kind of easy to quit. Nobody asks you to be perfect, but if you keep trying, that's the one thing you can do, and that's a credit to you. So I mean, going through life, I'd say you can't influence a lot of things like whether you're going to win the award or be the famous person or get a ton of money, or you can't control the result, and you can't control a lot of the things that you're born with or not, like looks, money, talent, all those sorts of things are just, those are God-given. And if you have them, great. If you don't have them, great. Doesn't matter. All of us are given a different set of random gifts. The one thing that each of us can control is our integrity, and because those are the things that you earn or you lose very quickly. And nobody can take your integrity away from you but you. And nobody can give you your integrity but you. So those are the sorts of things that I think of when I think of the Marine Corps experience. Nobody's going to tell me, I'm a lesser person because I'm ugly, or nobody's going to tell me I'm a better person because I'm handsome. Those have nothing. Those were random gifts, right? Whatever they are. But whether you work hard at being honest and forthright and the most ethical person you can be, that is something that is totally within your control, and that's something to be proud of if you achieve it. And there's no finish line on any of that stuff. It's each of us are imperfect beings, and nobody's completely ethical, and nobody's completely honest, and nobody's completely true to other people, but we can all work at that every day. So that's what I think of when I think of the Marine Corps. And that could be anything. That could be the Peace Corps, that could be, being a student here, that could be working, at Baskin Robbins, that could be anywhere.
And what would you say the most powerful experiences you took from your service?
Powerful?
Yeah, like the most profound experience you had.
I don't know. I saw a few events where I saw some real heroes. I saw a crash one night on the aircraft carrier deck, and there was a fire, and a lot of people were at risk, and there were some very dangerous minutes, and I saw people disregarding their roles and disregarding their duties and just coming together and disregarding their ranks, and just everybody just screw it. I don't care what the expectation is here. I'm going to get the job done. You know, I saw some cowardice too. I mean, I saw some people run. So.
And how did you earn your medals that you were talking about?
Well, it's just being there. The only one that's a combat medal is the air medal. If you fly more than 20 combat missions, you get an air medal. And I flew 24 combat missions over Iraq. So I got the air medal, which is, it's good. The other ones were just, you know, Armed Forces Expeditionary Medal, the Southwest Asia Service Medal, the Kuwait Liberation Medal. That's all because I was there enforcing the no-fly zone. But it wasn't just for a pilot. That was, I think all the guys on the ship got that. The air medal only a pilot gets because it's only the pilot flying the mission. But the other stuff, everybody that's, whether you're changing the oil in airplanes or shuffling the paperwork down below decks, you get those medals because we're all in it together. So.
All right. And I think that is going to conclude our interview. Thank you for your time.
Awesome.
And I'd really like to thank you for your service.
Oh, well, that's nice of you to say that. It always kind of puzzles me a little bit, but that's great. People say it.